Hi, in this short video we're going to discuss how to create a data set from paper-based surveys. So suppose you have conducted a survey and now all the answers are in paper, right? So you have a stack of paper that looks pretty much like this, right? So you have many surveys from different respondents, but now you want to analyze this data, and for that you need to create a data set, and we're going to talk about how to do that in Excel. So we're going to talk about 5 steps that generally you need to use when creating a data set. The first one is order your questionnaires. Then you number your questionnaires that are in order. You name your variables, define and name your variables. Create a code book for those variables, right, that contains variable labels and value labels. And then you actually go into inputting the data into a spreadsheet. And now for categorical level variables, I'll teach you a trick to use data validation that would make your life a lot easier when entering data for categorical variables. So, first thing you need to do is order your questionnaire. Right? If you use stratified random sampling or cluster sampling, you want to order the field questionnaires based on these groupings. Right? All the surveys coming from one strata together, and then all the surveys for a different strata together as well, or from different clusters. This will help you when analyzing the data and when creating additional variables that reflect this strata or these clusters. It also helps when you have pre and post data, right? So you want to order them based on your sampling method, right? Then you want to number your surveys. Each number in your each survey gets a unique number, a unique code, and this number will represent a variable in the data set that will allow you to go back and forth from the paper-based survey to your Excel spreadsheet. It will also help you have a de-identified data set so that respondents are kept anonymous in the data set. And you can lock the paper-based surveys away to avoid any issues with sensitive questions. Okay, so let's go to our survey. Suppose that we have a stack of surveys, and in this case we're just a random sample. So the order was not that important. So we just ordered them by when we did the survey, right? So the first respondent here, I gave it a number 1, right? So I numbered the survey. This is survey number 1. This one was the second respondent. I gave them number 2, number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. So we have 10 paper-based surveys. And they're all ordered and numbered, right? This number is going to link, again, the paper survey to the data set. All right, now we want to create our variable names, right? We want to define how many variables, which are going to be our variables, and we're going to name our variables, right? Now, in general, each questionnaire item will become a variable in the data set. Right, except for some special cases that we'll discuss in another video in this series. But in general, each item, each question is a variable in the data set. Now, when you're naming your variables, give your variables short names, about 10 characters. That will allow you, that will remind you what the question, what the item, the survey item is about, and will allow you to go back and forth. Again, between the data set and the paper-based survey. So I'm going to show you an example of this. Suppose that we have this the survey So the first question we have in this questionnaire is this, right? The reaction to this statement, I like statistics. And we have this, these are the answer choices, but this is one of the items. So now this will become a variable in our data set, right? This is another item, right? Second item, this will also become a variable in our data set. So if we go to the data set, you can see here that I have the variable number, right? Now the label for that variable is the respondent number, right, or the questionnaire number. And this can take any total of 50 surveys, so it can take any value from 1 to 50. Then we go to the second variable. The second variable will be the variable like stats. And this variable, right, is coming from this question, I like statistics. Notice the name is short, and it reminds me to what what the question is. The label is this variable represents the response to this statement, and the values that this can take are this one: strongly disagree, disagree, agree, strongly agree, not sure, blank, or incorrectly filled. Now let's talk about these last two, blank or incorrectly filled. You will see that some surveys, right, you will encounter that, for example, in this one, the respondent didn't answer this question. He left it or she left it blank, right? So we need to code for that. So we'll create an extra value that is called blank, like the respondent left it blank. And in other cases, you will have that the respondent incorrectly filled the question, right? Maybe checked on 2, strongly agree and strongly disagree. So that's an incorrect answer, right? They were only supposed to choose 1. So we have another category for incorrectly filled. Then the variable like stats, right, which is the response to the statement I like statistics, can take all these values, right? Now, the third variable corresponds to this question. I was good at math in high school, right? Is the same scale. So good at math, that's the name of the variable. We're going to, the variable label is responding to the statement, I was good at math in high school. And you can take exactly the same values as the other one, right? It is the Likert scale that we had here, right? Now, when we move to the next question, what is the next question, right? Course expectations, right? Please tell us what about your expectations for this course. That is an open-ended question, right? So we'll call that expectation. The label is open-ended item asking for course expectations, something like that. Values, well, it can take any value. It's an open-ended, and it's not a numerical question. It's a text box question, right? Or in dataset lingo, this would be a string variable, it's just text in it. Then we go to question number 3. How many college level math courses have you taken, right? So how would we call that variable? I called it math, right? It reminds me of the question. And so on, right? At the end, I ended up with something like this. So the variables that I'm going to have are this, right? These are their labels, right? And these are the values for each of the questions, right? Now the values are really important when you have categorical level questions, right? For example, the respondent's age. Let's look at that one. These are the values that can go in the question or in the answers, plus blank if the respondent didn't answer this question, or incorrectly filled if the respondent incorrectly answered the question, right? So the values for the variable age are less than 18, 19 to 26, 27 to 32, and so on. Okay, now that is a codebook. A codebook is a document that tells you what variables are in a data set, what each variable is, and the values in each of the variables. That is the minimum information that you require from a codebook, and that is required in a codebook. Other codebooks coming from surveys would include the actual item in the codebook, and that is good practice to have the actual item. In this case, we don't have the actual item, but it would be helpful to have it. That way, you don't really need it. All right, so we have the codebook, we have the variables that we're going to use. Now we're ready to move into the actual data, right? So in the data set, this is a different worksheet right now. These are my variables, right? Number, like stats, good at math, expectation, math, GPA, sex, and age. We're ready to start inputting the data. Okay. Here in step 4, I had in the PowerPoint that, create the codebook. We already talked about that. The codebook should include at the minimum the variable names, the variable labels, and the value labels. Here I am discussing what to do with missing answers, right? What to do with wrong answers, right? It's good practice to create one value for missing answers and another for wrong answers. And this is for categorical variables that you can have in data set. In this example, we used blank for missing answers and incorrectly filled for wrong answers. All right, inputting the data. Now, in a data set, generally, you put the variable names across the columns, just like we did here. The variable names across the columns, and each row, right, will be a survey, right? So we will start with row number 1 here, which will correspond to survey number 1, right? It will correspond to this one, right? And then we would move, and we'll do row by row, moving along, right? This row will correspond to the first survey. The second row will correspond to survey number 2 here, and so on. Okay. Now, for example, here, survey number 1. Let's go to survey number 1 and start inputting the data. Here, this is number 1, so it's respondent number 1. Now, for like stats, what can we see? Well, the values that this variable can take, right, are here in our codebook. I'm sorry, let me move that. Are here in our codebook, right? Strongly disagree, agree, disagree, and so on. So let's put it in our data. I like statistics. That's our first variable. Okay. Now, the respondent did not answer this. So what would we choose? We would say incorrectly filled. Right? Now, notice what I did here. Excel is not allowing me to put that one in, right? Because I have a typo there, incorrectly filled, right? That is a very useful tool when you're inputting data, and it's called data validation tool. Now let me talk about how I'm going to erase that to show you how to do that. Here, if we go to data and then validate. By the way, in in Excel for PCs, this looks exactly the same. The data validation tells Excel that the data that you're putting in a cell, right, can be any value, can be a whole, it has to be a whole number or a decimal or a date or a time or a text of a certain length, right? You can tell Excel what you want in the cells, right? And Excel will make sure that what you want is in the cell. Now, this is the default, right? Any value, right? That's that. Usually you would find any value for your cells, right? So for like stats, you can put, don't know. And even though that was not a valid value, Excel will allow you to have that. But we don't want that. We want Excel to control exactly what we put in these types of variables. So we're going to use data validation, right? So let me go to the data validation page here, right? And that I put this on a different worksheet. So I have these types of answers, right? The first one is for Likert scale, and all my Likert scale questions have these options. I don't want any other options in there, right? I want those cells corresponding to these questions that have, or variables that have these values, to only be these ones, nothing else. For the variable gender, I only want these values, no other values. For the variable age, I only want these values. So I'm going to use this as a validation list for these questions, right? For this question, I want only these values in, no other values, right? So how do I do that? I go to the cell, go to validate, choose data validation, and then right now it's allowing any value, but I only want values that are coming from a list that I'm going to give Excel. So you click on list, go to source, and then go to my data validation page and choose that list and tell Excel I only want values from this list to be allowed in that cell. Now we're back here, and notice when I click on like stats, Excel gives me the list and I can choose the correct one. In this case, survey number 1 did not answer that question, left it blank. So when I click there, I can just click blank, and first respondent has that blank. Now for this one, good at math, I did the same. I went to data validation and I told Excel I only want answers coming from this list, and it did so, right? So I can, in this case, this respondent, survey number 1, answer not sure. Expectation is an open-ended question, so I don't have to validate that. The answer is none. For math, I don't have to validate that one, those one, or although I could put whole numbers, right? Or numbers there. GPA 2.3. For gender, I did the data validation. So in this case, we're looking at a male respondent. And for age, this respondent did not answer the question. Did not answer the question, left it blank. We are done with the first respondent. Now we move to the second respondent. Now if we had the data validation done, we can do it for all these cells, right? Notice that I did that for every single cell here. You can do it for entire regions, right? So for question number 2, for questionnaire number 2, I have this respondent disagreed with this statement, disagreed that they were that she was good at math, expectations, learn how to present data, For math, 0. For GPA, 3.8. For gender, female, and so on. We just keep going until we have all the surveys in. Then we would number 3, 4, 4, and so on, until we end up with something like this, right? We have our 10 surveys and all the data for that. This is a data set for the first 10 observations. This is a data set that is ready for analysis. Okay, now that concludes this first video. On the next one, I am going to talk about how to enter data for pre-post surveys. Thanks for watching.